Hi everyone, this is William Vega, and this is my Sociopolitical Context video presentation for assignment number 1. Before identifying my sociopolitical context, I will introduce the main entities who interact in it and ultimately makes it possible. At the beginning of the spiral cycle, we find the policymakers and legislators. I have called them oppressor subject. Why? Well, I have called them like that since they are the ones who create discursive mechanisms of oppression. So, oppressor subjects make policies that convey oppressive discourse. This oppression is conveyed through contents in the curriculum, standardizing testing, and the false idea that the personal and professional success depends entirely on how productive you are for the society. We then find schools. Unlike school districts, schools are just another means through which oppression is transmitted. Once the policies are routed toward the target population, it is necessary to verify that the supremacy mandates are in place. This is certainly what schools do. Schools are the setting where oppressive discourse is directly delivered to target families through culturally and linguistically irrelevant instructional practices and contents. Schools are the channel through which oppression flows. However, there are still some important agents in this circuit. We then find schools. Unlike school districts, schools are just another means through which oppression is transmitted. Once the policies are routed toward the target population, it is necessary to verify that the supremacy mandates are in place. This is certainly what schools do. Schools are the setting where oppressive discourse is directly delivered to target families through culturally and linguistically irrelevant instructional practices and contents. Schools are the channel through which oppression flows. However, there are still some important agents in this circuit. Did the word teachers cross through your mind? If yes, then you're right. Teachers, it's our next entity. Teachers can actually be seen as passive agents who are limited to represent the oppressive educational system that we are part of. However, it is also true that we are the only ones who can truly break and disrupt this sociopolitical discursive circuit. You might be wondering how? Well, teachers are the only ones who can directly interact with students and their families without being strictly supervised. Teachers are the only ones who can decide what culturally and linguistically instructional practices should look like in the classrooms in order to make learning and contents meaningful for the students. And above those things, in order to make the content a truly liberator tool. This is where I think the cycle of oppression could be broken through emancipatory discursive practices. Before identifying my sociopolitical context, I will introduce the main entities who interact in it and ultimately makes it possible. All these elements are transferred to our second entity, school districts. This is the first station of oppressive discourse. This is where the discourse is properly matched to the target families. School districts are the ones who narrow federal policies, oppressive discourses to make sure that they are targeting the right families in the right way. It is at the school districts level where oppressive mechanisms are accepted, socialized, and institutionalized. I will now go over some federal mandates that have impacted multilingual and minority learners in the United States. So the first legislation that I would like to go over is the Bilingual Education Act of 1968. The Bilingual Education Act of 1968 recognized that language minority students were facing huge disadvantages to equally access education due to the prevalent sink or swim approach. However, there was not any legislation at that time aimed to take care of that disparity. School districts could choose whether they desired to implement it or not. Bilingual programs are their jurisdiction. The first oppressive and discriminatory policy in the country is the English-only movement. It was founded in 1983 by the late Senator S.I. Hayakawa, an immigrant himself, by the way, and it is still active. So it has about 1.8 million active members across the country. Basically, this movement seeks to establish English as a unique official language in the country and to force each school to exclusively teach in English. Obviously, bilingual programs are not a priority and they do not fit into this movement. Also, federal funds are not supposed to be expended on strengthening linguistic diversity. In other words, this is a discriminatory mindset which pushes the people to accept and to stick to a dominant cultural and linguistic stereotype if they want to succeed in the United States. If they don't do it, they will never fit in this society. The reauthorization of the Bilingual Act in 1994. The Clinton administration granted some federal funds to bilingual education programs to promote equal opportunities to multilingual learners to access rigorous content in both English and home languages. As a result, two-way bilingual programs became so popular across the nation. We can also mention the UNS era in 1998. It was the end of bilingual education policy. This initiative was entirely sponsored by the millionaire Ron Unz, who used to present himself as a pro-immigrants' rights defender. Unz spread some misconceptions and false myths about bilingual education amongst voters of Proposition 227. For example, he would spread that Hispanic parents were being denied the right to decide their children to receive instruction only in English. He also made people believe that teaching other language was negatively impacting the achievement rate of Latino students. My question is, how could this all happen? How could people simply believe in such a populist politician? Well, the answer to this question is heartbreaking, but at the same time, it is encouraging. There was not formal research in the field that supported the socio-cultural benefits of bilingual education. Despite being sad, this is the beginning point of a new era where a statistic-based research is called to rule the way bilingual education is delivered. Another important moment of the legislation for bilingual education is the recancellation of the Bilingual Act. To me, it could be posed as two steps back. It happened in 2001. The Congress did not only cancel the funds for bilingual program, but did they also remove the term bilingual of the text of the Elementary and Secondary Act. This recancellation caused confusion among legislators and citizens in general. The No Child Left Behind policy was another crucial moment of bilingual education legislation. And it was simply the legalization of a consecutive intentional chain of mistakes. This policy was disguised as a unique opportunity to maintain home language while gaining proficiency in English. However, the real intention was to insert high-stakes testing as an oppression mechanism that prevents multilingual families from social advancement. The No Child Left Behind policy recognizes the importance of bilingual education, but it does not regulate it, which it's the most terrible mistake. This policy emphasizes in English language instruction. Is it worth to invest resources on bilingual education if the students are only tested in English? How could ESL and bilingual programs that are not statistically monitored truly help students achieve advanced proficiency in English? In addition to this, school funding will now depend on the success in standardizing testing, which of course is comprised of academic language register that multicultural students do not possess. More recently, in 2015, the Obama administration signed the Every Student Succeeds Act. It's centered on making some progress in the areas of high school graduation, education progress, and improved identification of gifted and talented students. Also, it paid some attention to the achievement gaps and embraced idea to balance equity and quality in the educational practice. However, it still relies on testing to determine whether a student succeeds or fails. Also, it completely ignored the impact socioeconomic conditions have on low-income students and simply pretended low-income students will learn in the same way that why medium-class students would do it. This policy also provoked the many schools closes due to their low performance in standardizing testing. Finally, there are still some other relevant moments that may have impacted bilingual education in the United States. However, I have chosen these 7 crucial legislation to support the social-political context and the relationships of subordination that flows in this social circuit, and it utilizes bilingual education as a mechanism of oppression as opposed to be a liberator mechanism. The Early Exit Bilingual Program has been the most popular federal funded bilingual program in the United States since 1970. This program is a segregated model as it keeps culturally and linguistically diverse students in total isolation of English-speaking students. Also, it supports dominant stereotypes by presenting multicultural learners as slow learners who need cognitive remediation. This program prevents multicultural learners from receiving rigorous content in their first language, as the majority of their instructional time is devoted to learn English. As a consequence, they struggle in standardizing testing. To begin with, ideally, culturally and linguistically diverse learners should receive rigorous academic content in both their home and English language every single day at schools. Sadly, some bilingual programs convey dominant ideologies that are hidden behind the curtain of being an excellent way to promote equity and equally access to education. The Early Exit Bilingual Program has been the most popular federal funded bilingual program in the United States since 1970. This program is a segregated model as it keeps culturally and linguistically diverse students in total isolation of English-speaking students. Also, it supports dominant stereotypes by presenting multicultural learners as slow learners who need cognitive remediation. This program prevents multicultural learners from receiving rigorous content in their first language, as the majority of their instructional time is devoted to learn English. As a consequence, they struggle in standardizing testing. Unfortunately, this is not the only bilingual program that helps perpetuating white dominant cultural and linguistic stereotypes in the United States. We will now talk a little bit about the late exit or developmental bilingual education. Unlike early exit bilingual program, developmental bilingual programs offers instruction in students' first language beyond the K through 5 limit that the early exit bilingual program offers. In theory, these programs are comprised of a vast bilingual curriculum and a solid multicultural component to broaden both social and cultural perspective. However, the implementation of these programs highly depends on the demands of English-speaking families. It certainly has another ideological component. Due to its English-speaking parents-created nature, the late exit bilingual program may expand the achievement and socioeconomic gap between marginalized and English-speaking families. There is a powerful reason to explain this. White parents have had more and better access to education. Therefore, their children might have both formal and informal language register. This, of course, allows them to have more solid language structures in English to be transferred to a second language. As a consequence, English-speaking students may end up being fully bilingual, while multicultural learners end up with low proficiency in both languages. The interest of this program is to equip white students with an additional cultural and linguistic asset by spending funds designated to support culturally and linguistically diverse students. The bilingual immersion, two-way bilingual or dual language education. This is really meaningful to me because this was the reason why I first arrived in the United States. I was initially hired as in bilingual immersion program in North Carolina. So this program is also called 90-10 program. This is because the 90% of instruction occurs in the minority language, whereas the other 10% corresponds to the instruction in the dominant language. The 50-50 model also works well in this educational model. Bilingual immersion consists of a bilingual program for English speakers, meaning English speakers may become fluent in a second language. However, for minority students, it is presented as a maintenance model that allows minority students to receive literacy and academic development in their primary language. An outstanding advantage of this program has to do with the emphasis on the linguistic, cognitive, and academic developmental processes. So far, this program sounds fantastic and very beneficial for multilingual learners. Why? Well, because it maintains, reinforces, and develops their home language. Actually, it could be posed in this sense as an emancipatory bilingual model. However, there is still a major concern. My concern in this regard has to do with the fact that most multilingual families are not even literate in their first language. All they have is their basic communicative skills to interact among themselves. In fact, culturally, linguistically, students do not possess primary language consolidated patterns that may easy their transition to a second language. As a consequence, the dual language program ends up empowering English-speaking students through the bilingualism. And at the same time, it is marginalizing multilingual learners as they end up with low proficiency in both primary and second language. In this final part of my video presentation, I will go over how ideologies embedded in bilingual programs and legislation maintain a privileged status quo in the society. Accountability mechanisms of control maintain the hegemony of English over other languages. I find this idea so simple to be expressed. Standardizing testing determines success of a student. Standardizing testing is given in English. Therefore, instructional focus must be in English instruction, as this is the language that students will be tested on. These results overlap minority cultural and linguistic stereotypes to cruelly impose dominant linguistic practices. I wonder who has even considered what standardizing testing represents for culturally linguistically diverse students in terms of linguistic competences. Well, the majority of multilingual learners come from lower socioeconomic status and do not even have access to the formal register of the language at home. Instead, many of the language structures they bring from home are part of the informal language register. Of course, that they struggle when they try to interact with the formal register that comprises standardizing testing. As we all know, everything that has to do with standardizing testing uses the formal register of a language. So, how are culturally, linguistically diverse students whose parents did not even go to elementary school due to their socioeconomic conditions and do not spend more than 2 hours a day with them supposed to interact effectively with a written discourse, which is totally out of their linguistic reach? This situation, of course, maintains English-speaking students with the social and linguistic privileges granted by the generational status quo, ruled by the white supremacists. On the other hand, we also have the racial linguistic ideology embedded in bilingual programs. Culturally and linguistically diverse students with low English proficiency are normally served as if they had a major cognitive problem that needs to be remediated, as opposed to be served as talented learners who possess an additional linguistic asset. This ideology has made the multilingual students have to spend a lot of instructional time in special education classrooms and some other multidisciplinary areas, rather than simply staying in a classroom, gaining proficiency in both languages and mastering rigorous content. It's true, bilingualism does not guarantee emancipation. It helps English-speaking students to successfully and productively incorporate into the neoliberal society. Due to its nature, bilingualism's major concern is that students gain proficiency in fluently speaking 2 languages. Here's something really interesting. Multicultural students are obviously bilingual, of course, because they can fluently speak 2 languages. Although this does not guarantee multicultural learners academic success at school. Unfairly, it does guarantee that English-speaking students acquire an additional tool. Yes, by becoming bilingual is an additional tool that the dominant English-speaking students will now have to keep their place in the social hierarchy. That being said, when English-speaking students become bilingual, they are also very likely to become biliterate, as they will have high proficiency levels in reading and writing in both English, which is their mother language, and the minority language. From my perspective, language proficiency is how current instructional and linguistic practices are helping to perpetuate social, economic, cultural, and language stereotype over minorities. In this regard, Fairclough highlighted the consciousness of language is the first step towards a real emancipation. Why? Well, because it allows dominated populations to interact with both the surface and the deep structure of the language, as well as with the hidden ideologies that the words may contain. Ideologies that may actually become enslaving. From my perspective, bilingual education should move toward biliteracy programs instead of simply act as a mask of linguistic oppression. Biliteracy programs will provide emerging bilingual learners with balanced bilingual instruction to master primary and second language at the same level, and therefore to truly break the generational cycle of oppression. If the dominant system wants to place English white students in biliteracy classroom, that's totally fine to me. However, what is not okay to me is to use culturally and linguistically diverse students as a mean to prepare English white students to succeed at college, while our multicultural learners are simply given the minimum to succeed at low-paid jobs. In the last part of my video presentation, I will try to explain how formal research, specifically how research in social linguistic and discourse analysis have potential to be considered as the right path to emancipation. I will now discuss some critical reflections that seeks to propose an emancipatory discourse as far as it concerns to bilingual education. So far, I have argued that social disparities have their origin in linguistic inequities. As a result, the origin of the solution must start with the language. The first step is actually considering the language at the beginning point.
So, we know it is not possible to abolish the standardizing testing now. However, it is very feasible to provide our multicultural learners with the linguistic tools to succeed in testing. I do believe that developing a Spanish proficiency test that effectively measures the cultural, linguistically, and diverse student lexical ability, reading and writing proficiency level in their home language may highly contribute to build a new emancipatory discourse. Why? Well, because it will suggest the instructional move to simultaneously gain proficiency in both language, the English as well as their home language. I feel so identified with Fairclough's idea of how not being equipped with linguistic and semi-linguistic tools to produce and to interpret discourses in different contexts could represent the hegemony of a dominant language and therefore an ideology.
When we look closely at this spiral model that I have included in my presentation, I immediately notice that the only step where this cycle of oppression can be disrupted is actually at school. That is where we as educators play a major role in changing oppressive practices for emancipatory discourses. By this, I mean, and I really want to emphasize on this, we have the social responsibility of creating new knowledge through formal research. This is the only way in which we will be able to significantly change the status quo as well as the oppressive paradigms that comprise bilingual education in the United States. It is through formal research that we can grow liberation mindset in all in all our multicultural families. It is through formal research, it is through this course analysis that we will be able to diagnose, to remediate the inequities and disparities that perpetuate the power. So I want to conclude my presentation by reflecting on what I have argued for throughout my presentation, and it is formal research. Okay, when we look closely at the spiral model that I have presented today, we notice that the only step, being realistic, the only step where the oppressive discourse may be disrupted is at school, and more specifically, in our classrooms. This is where we as educators play a major role in changing oppressive practices for emancipatory discourses. By this, I mean, and I really want to emphasize on this, we have the social responsibility of creating new knowledge. And how is that knowledge created? Well, we have the social responsibility to investigate, to research, to create that knowledge that change traditional and oppressive paradigms. This is the only way in which we will be able to significantly change the status quo of the society, as well as the oppressive mindsets that comprise bilingual education in the United States. It is through formal research that we will be able to diagnose, to remediate the inequities and disparities that perpetuates the power in our society.